today we're going to be talking about some real strategic ways to handle our finances during a separation or a divorce. And Rhonda is the expert here. So Rhonda, if you will go ahead and share with us just a little bit about your story and how and why you got into this work.
Yeah, absolutely. So I guess I have to go back just a little bit, but in 2002, I started in the financial industry, and I was 28 years old. I knew very little about money, but I knew that I wanted to help people. And I was in the financial industry for about 14 years, loved what I was doing, but had a lot of women that were coming through my doors that were frustrated with the divorce process. Either their spouse was in control of the money and the finances, and maybe they didn't have as clear of a picture as they wanted to, or they didn't know what questions to ask, or they didn't feel like they knew enough, and yet they've also found themselves facing divorce. And so in 2014, I was in my office, and I thought, you know what do I want my business to look like 5 years from now? And the answer was different than what it was. And so I decided, after much inner turmoil, to leave the financial industry and launch the Women's Financial Wellness Center. And the first year we had over 300 women that came through our doors. Since that time, we're now almost in year 5 and are reaching women all over the country with a message of hope and inspiration and practical tips and tools to help them navigate through the financial aspect of their divorce. One of the questions that I most often get is, Rhonda, have you gone through divorce? And the answer is no. So a lot of people are surprised by that. However, I felt like the emotional connection that I had with the women stemmed a lot from my childhood. And after doing lots of self-exploration, what I realized was that, having been a daughter of an alcoholic, having been in a very dysfunctional home, never feeling safe, never feeling like I had a voice, those were the kinds of things that I really was able to connect with my clients on, because that's how most of them were feeling. And as I'm working with my clients and prospective clients and chatting on our podcast and all that kind of stuff, most people are surprised that I haven't gone through divorce, because I'm very in tune with what it is that they need. And so I think there's certain things in my life that have prepared me for that. In addition, I've gone through what would be considered a business divorce, which was painful and horrible. And I went through that same grieving process. And so while it's not exactly the same, there are definitely aspects that I'm able to relate to. And I think the other thing to this whole picture is I believe that it's God's purpose for my life to empower women, because I can provide a safe space, a safe place for them to have difficult conversations and rebuild the trust.
Yes, that's awesome. So for the people who are watching now, can you share with us some of your, I'd say, most practical or important tips for somebody who's newly separated? So that shock is here, that holy cow, what's going on? And you don't know which way's up. So something that maybe a first step in that situation.
Yeah, so I think the first step is to really resist the temptation to be assumptive. And the assumption is that this individual has your best interest in mind. Because what happens with that is it clouds our ability to be able to gather information. So I think the very first thing that women can do, once they've said, okay, I'm not going to accept assumptions, I'm not going to assume that it's going to be amicable, I'm not going to assume that he has the best interest in mind, I'm not going to assume that I know where everything is gather the facts. Gather documents, gather information, and that is probably the best place that women can start. And I'll give you an example. I was working with a gal who came into my office, and we were meeting with an attorney, and she had a legal pad, right? And she had a list of all of the assets on this piece of paper. And she says, well, this is everything that we have. Like, I know that it's, 100% accurate. Okay, well, I'm not saying it isn't, but where's the documentation to support the numbers that are on here? And she didn't have it. And yet she was taking at face value everything that her soon-to-be ex-spouse was telling her was kosher, right? And so, it's so hard for women to think that, they don't have, after years of marriage, right, that they don't have your best interest at mind. And I'm not saying they don't, but we just can't assume that they do.
Yeah, confession alert, I did that and it did not work out well for me. I actually went and saw a lawyer who I didn't hire because her advice felt so cutthroat. I couldn't handle it. And all of her advice, if I had chosen to follow it, would have done well for me. And it was, and I was just like, you want me to do what, um, and and I totally assumed that everything was going to be okay and everyone would do what they said they were going to do. Not the case. So that's really good advice, Rhonda.
Yeah, it's, and it's challenging. I mean, I just talked to a client today whose husband said, "Oh, you'll be well taken care of," and I said, "What does that mean, though?"
Yeah, please define. That's very, relative.
Yes, like, oh well, it's just a smoke screen for don't ask too many questions, is what I see that to be. But she's still in that spot where she's having a hard time with it. But she did go back and ask him, "What exactly does that mean when you say that?" And I was like, "Yes, yes."
Good for her. And when we're talking about specifically, if you're separating because of infidelity, the person you're separating from or divorcing has proven that can lie and manipulate you for extended periods of time, because you have to do that to get away with an affair, right? For
Yeah.
any amount of time, at least. And so when they have this proven track record that about at this point, it feels silly that we then think that they're going to not lie and manipulate. But we still, people always say they feel very foolish. Oh, I'm so stupid. How did I not know? I'm like, no, you're not stupid. You're just a kind and trusting person. I'm going to
Absolutely.
choose that all day long.
Yeah.
All day long, I'm going to choose that. And if I get screwed a little bit here and there, fine. But that's fantastic advice for sure. So
Yeah.
if we're looking at, that's a new separation, what are some practical things we can do, especially for the person who doesn't know of all the accounts and all the assets? Maybe they weren't the ones paying the bills or charge of that. How do they even go about finding all of that information? I mean, that can
Oh,
be
that's
very.
such a good question. Well, I will start by saying that I think a lot of times women feel like they are in victim mode because they don't know where to start looking. So I always say, watch the mail. Now, sometimes that isn't always as easy either because maybe somebody intercepts the mail. However, I did learn recently that the post office actually has a feature that they will take a copy of all of your mail prior to it being delivered and send you an email.
Wow, really?
It's free.
How do you sign up for that?
I have to find the name of what that is, and I'll send it to you so we can include it in the notes. But how cool of a service is that? Now, not that we want one more email, right? But if there is a concern that things that maybe are being sent aren't getting to you, you want that, right? Like, you want to be able to see, the mail that's being sent. So that's one way. The other way is to, in hiring an attorney, right, they should be going through a process where they're going to ask the other person to provide information and documentation. The challenge with that is you're relying on that other person to give you the, Boy Scouts honor that they disclosed everything. So there's ways that they can use legal processes to be able to do that. And I'm certainly not an attorney, but I do partner with them to make sure that we've got those pieces in place. The other tool that we have started to use within the Women's Financial Wellness Center is introduce women to a financial private investigator. And it sounds like, I don't know, but if you really want to find stuff, there's ways to find it. And so I want to empower women to say, you know what, I might not have everything at my fingertips right now, but I have resources of ways that I can find bank accounts, brokerage accounts, apartments leased in names, LLC set up. The other thing is, one other thing that I've had a previous client do, which I was like, it's like those moments where you're like, oh my gosh, I'm so proud of you. Like, this is such a great idea. And that was, they had just purchased a home, probably within the last year and a half of them deciding that they were going to get divorced. And she called the mortgage broker and said, hey, can I have a copy of our mortgage documents? Well, anybody who's gone through purchasing a home knows how much you have to disclose to them, pretty much everything.
Right, everything.
And so she got a copy. And you know what? I mean, her name was on it. She went and got a stack and went through it and highlighted the crap out of it to figure out what they had and where it is. So there's ways to find out, but those are some of the things that I have seen women use or we have personally used to help women find assets.
Yeah, that's awesome. It's, what's hard about it is that's not a fun task to do, right? Ever. But then you're expected to do it when you're in the thick of trauma or you're in depression because you've just found out about this affair. So it's very overwhelming. So it's really good to have tools and people to kind of hold your hand and walk you through that, because that's just overwhelming, period.
Yeah.
Then you throw in everything else we're in. It's just really hard.
It totally is. And, you and I were talking before, and I said, you really need to have a core team of people that aren't in the day-to-day stuff that can see more clearly. I mean, I just had a conversation with a client today, and I said, you have to realize, though, I'm on the outside enough that I can see clearly on what's actually transpiring and happening here. So there's an element of, I said, I need you to trust me when I'm giving you certain suggestions on what to do because I can see what's happening, right? And I know that's hard, right? I'm asking somebody who's just been, in a really difficult situation to trust somebody else, right? And I recognize that. But this core team of people is, a family law attorney, a therapist or therapy resources, and a financial coach. Somebody that's independent from financial product sales that isn't there to sell a product, but is actually there to help guide and direct, through the process. So once they have that core team of people, I think, and especially if you can give permission to those three people to talk, right? All better. Because, it's no different than having a physician or a team of surgeons that are talking on your behalf. That's really what you want. And there's ways to do it where it's not going to cost you hundreds of thousands of dollars if you get the right people in the right places on your team.
Yeah, that's definitely true. Definitely. So, definitely you want to have your team, have everybody together, working well. So if you are in this process, Rhonda, what would you say are a couple of tips people need to be using as they're in this separation heading towards divorce?
So I would say, again, surround yourself with people that can support you and speak life into you, right? That care about you. I have found that a lot of times, even when women are in really tough spots, if we can find one thing that they can do, one action item, right? So like, for example, it may be getting a book. It may mean listening to a podcast. It may be, taking an online course, right? Like just one thing that they can commit to that will help them feel like they're moving forward. And so that's probably, one of the key tips. The other tip is, depending on where people are at, right, is there's a book that I will often recommend to women, and it's not specifically for divorce, okay, but it's been one of my favorites, and it's called Smart Women Finish Rich by David Bach. You can often find them at half-price bookstores or Amazon. It's not a brand new book. Okay, mine is like so highlighted and written up, and the pages are, all crinkled. But it's one of those books where you can pull out, and you may read the first couple of chapters, right? But it becomes a resource. Like, okay, I'm faced with having to, make this decision. Let me just get a little information on the terminology so I can get my head around when people are talking about X, Y, Z. I think the formula that I often like to refer to is it's knowledge plus experience that equals confidence. If we don't have the knowledge and we have the experience, it's trial and error. If we have the knowledge without the experience, it's theory. We have to have those two things working together. And what I have found is that when we do have those two things working together, women are more confident. Women are amazingly gifted in making good decisions when they have the right info. The challenge is, like you were referencing, when they're in this spot of manipulation and control that's swirling around, they doubt themselves. They doubt if they're smart enough. They doubt if they can do it. They doubt if they have the energy, et cetera, et cetera. So, gathering the information and knowledge little bits at a time, right? So they can make good decisions and become more confident.
Yes. And we don't have control over our circumstances, but if you are in a situation where you find out about an affair, but the other person doesn't know that you know yet, that is also a good time to go ahead and gather up that information before you get shut out. And I don't say that to be sneaky. I say that to be smart, especially if you're a person and you've got children and you need to know, the full picture. Then that's really wise to go ahead and kind of be strategic. That is very hard to do. So if you are able to do that and kind of sit with that information and gather, more power to you. But yeah, that is a wise choice if you can do that. So I guess one thing that I would like to discuss is, for us at After the Affair, my heart is really to create a resource that anybody can afford, period. I want nobody to ever suffer alone. I want them to have direction and resources.
Yeah.
And that's what we did. So our sessions are under $9 a pop, and that's on purpose. But what else we've done, because sometimes that's too much, and that's okay. So for every subscription, we actually offer a subscription to somebody in need. And I don't know why, but this is how it is for us. Almost every person that reaches out for help is a pregnant woman or just had a baby. Mm. And so for me, and I didn't expect that. That was a surprise to me. It's especially heartbreaking because they're in such a vulnerable place, and they're reaching out for financial help. They can't afford, $8 for a session. So they're in a really tough spot. We ask no questions about this and give it to them freely. And that is a pleasure for us. And so speaking to those people who are in that really tough spot, and some of them have been abandoned, or they have to move in with parents or friends. Some of them are living out of their cars. They're in terrible spots, and they have people depending on them. What are a couple of things? So they're starting from zero, or they're starting from the negatives, honestly. They might have a bunch of debt from their marriage. What would you say for them, one or two tips that would be helpful for them to start establishing themselves on their own again?
Yeah, so, this is certainly super challenging, right? Because when we look at the divorce process as a whole, there's a lot of resources that people usually need to be able to get through the process. And sometimes, depending on the attorney, right? I mean, I vetted out to work with the good ones, but there's plenty of ones that it's hard to get them to do their job, and you're paying them.
Right.
So now you've got to find an attorney that may be willing to do pro bono work, that could help them, because I think there are times when they're going to need legal guidance and advice. They could check within their state to see. I know in Wisconsin there is an organization that does have attorneys on staff that does provide free, legal counsel. I have had women sign up for, government benefits. This is maybe the first time they've ever found themselves really needing to be on food stamps.
And I'm going to say something about that real quick. If you are in that place and you need to do that, but you feel bad or even prideful, embarrassed about it, please, it is okay to ask for help, to reach out for help, to get that help. You're not a muncher. What's the word? Moocher, not a muncher. You're not less than. You are worthy. And honestly, Social Security and food stamps, that was all created to take care of widows and orphans originally. So that's the point. We are all delighted to pay into that system to help people who are truly in need. And And so I just want to encourage you, like, definitely reach out and get all the help you can as you get back on your feet, because that's what it's there for. Sorry,
Yeah.
Rhonda. I
Yeah.
just feel, I see that so much that, oh my gosh, like nobody can see me do this. And I hate that when
I
you
know.
really need it.
I know. It's tough. And there's no easy answer. That's the thing. I mean, it's like you got to check with the resources. You can check with churches and organizations. As far as free resources, I mean, as long as they have, a phone or access to some kind of, computer, they certainly could download or listen to, the podcast that I host, which is Divorce Conversations for Women. Again, I mean, what I see that being able to provide them with is the inspiration to be able to help them to get through their day. But unfortunately or fortunately, there are, government programs that are set up to be able to help women that are in that tough spot, whether it's food stamps or food share or, whatever. I wish I had a better answer for that, Melissa, because it's just, there's no easy answer. And I guess, just checking out what resources they may have available in their community. But it's yeah, I'm just kind of at a loss because there are resources available. It just depends on where they're located and what those specific organizations are offering. I mean, there may be rent assistance. Sometimes there is, but again, it's how many hours do you end up having to spend calling to find out about all of these resources, electric, all of that kind of stuff. I mean, it's time consuming,
It's difficult.
yeah.
So, yeah, I would say if that is where you are, and let's say you don't even have a computer, you can definitely go to your local library, use a computer there, and reach out to whatever social services you have access to. And there are experts who know the ins and outs of everything and to help you get back on your feet. And if you're here watching this, you're definitely the type of person who will work hard and try hard and not quit and not give up. So it will be a temporary time for you, and that's okay. It's okay to have a hard time. And what's cool is it's just going to make you so much stronger and just an amazing person on the other side of this. I remember I couldn't afford to buy winter jackets for my daughters. Just couldn't. They completely grew out of it. Like it was like this short and it was wintertime. And my very best friend, just the most amazing woman, went out and bought jackets. And I felt embarrassed at first, but I knew that if the shoe was on the other foot, I would do it for her and it would just be a pleasure. And so, it's okay to have people help you. It's okay to not have everything together. We're all kind of just a hot mess muddling through life anyways. So changing gears a little bit here, Rhonda, if I am newly separated and in a situation where I do need help for, getting my finances in together and having some really wise counsel, and I go to you, what are the things you're going to do with me? What are we going to work on together?
Yeah, so it kind of depends on, I always say, where do I come in? Am I in the beginning of the movie, the middle, or are the credits running, right? So it kind of depends on where we're at. But most of the time, what we'll do is I offer a 30-minute strategy session. And this is where I have an opportunity to learn a little bit more about their situation and give them at least one practical thing that they could do immediately. If there is an opportunity for us to work beyond that, some of the things that we work on is creating a budget. I know it isn't sexy or glamorous, but that budget becomes like a big deal, because I was working on one today with a client and she's in the red. And I told her, I said, in a normal situation, we don't want to be in the red for our budget. But when we're talking about divorce and the burden of proof is now on the woman to say, this is why I need maintenance, this is why I need child support, the budget becomes a very important negotiating tool. So we work with budgets and helping them. We also help them organize all of their financial documents. So, and it's in the process of the divorce process. So not saying they're not organized, but getting everything into one spot so we can start to be able to get an idea of the complexity or the situation at hand. We're also helping them fill out certain documents. So like the disclosure statement, I will help them with some of that. Certainly the attorneys have to review that, but I can help do all of that kind of stuff. Connecting them with resources, tools. So CPAs, attorneys, therapists, mortgage brokers. I mean, whoever they need, it's kind of the I've got a guy, but it's usually not a guy or not always a guy. So I have vetted out a team of people that I implicitly trust. I'm constantly evaluating the feedback from my clients to say, what is your experience in working with this particular individual? Because I want to make sure that we're bringing the best possible people to the table. We're also helping with communication and setting boundaries and a lot of those kind of difficult conversations as they go through the process. And then, of course, all the other stuff that we don't anticipate happening. So there's usually a bunch of that kind of stuff like, wow, okay, that is a different twist, and now we've got to figure out how to handle that. And then lastly, as they're going through the process, it's doing a financial review of the marital settlement agreement or that final divorce decree to say, okay, what are some of the things that we need to be looking at? And I have specific things that I look at to cross-check to make sure that by the time that they are signing that document, they have a good understanding of what's in there from a financial perspective. And then have them go back and advocate to the attorneys to get clarification or whatever. And then the final thing that I do is I offer a post-divorce storm cleanup.
Can you come to my house right now?
All right. Oh my gosh. I mean, because there's like right? It's like there's all this stuff afterwards. It's not like, oh, this is done and now I can move on. It's like, oh, well, we've got to put the house up for sale and that needs to happen within 6 months. And I need health insurance and I mean, there's all this stuff. And so I meet with them and map out a timeline. We get it in the calendar. We make sure that that stuff's moving forward. Because once the divorce is over, and if they have an attorney, the attorney sends them the final bill and a letter that says, hey, nice to work with you, good luck, and that's it. And so there's a lot of stuff that still needs to get ironed out after the fact, and I am the one to be able to help them do that.
Yes, and that's a big job. That's not, I wish I would have had you when I was going through this. Reading that like 20-page thing and your eyes are crossing and you know it's important, but you're like, oh,
right.
Yeah, it's really hard.
And even some of the best attorneys aren't, I mean, they're not financial experts and they're not therapists. Like, they're very good at what they do, but they need different perspectives, right? We all do. And so, to be able to look at it from a financial perspective is really valuable and, providing insight. So, yeah, it's not an easy task, that's for sure.
Yeah, it is. Not my favorite. So if someone wants to get in touch with you, what's the best way they can do that?
Yeah, absolutely. I would love for them to visit the website. It's www.womensfinancialwellnesscenter.com. They can schedule a 30-minute session. They can check out our podcasts there, read our blogs. Everything that they need would be on the site.
Awesome. Well, thank you so much. If you have any questions, feel free to leave them in the comments below. And be sure to go ahead and subscribe to After the Affairs channel. We'll have a lot of really helpful resources here for you to move forward in your healing. And, having your finances all on a row and you can feel peaceful about that, that's a huge part of your life. So it's very important. And feel free to reach out with your questions and we'll be sure to take care of that. Thanks so much, guys. Thank you again, Rhonda, for having some time with us and sharing your expertise.
Absolutely. Thanks, Melissa, for having me.
Thanks.